Hi, everyone. I'm Marcus. I work developer relations with Edge and Node, and we're going to be talking subgraphs today, specifically building subgraphs in Subgraph Studio, making sure that there's a resource for builders out there to really understand the ins and outs of using Subgraph Studio in relation to development and also into production. How does that relate to the graph network? How does that relate to GRT? Curation, all of these things I try to put into a nicely summarized workshop that if you're getting started building subgraphs and you have questions about deploying a subgraph, publishing a subgraph, and a few of those dynamics, this is the workshop for you. So any questions, please drop them in the chat. I am managing 3 different chats right now and also presenting a workshop. So feel free to drop questions in the chat, and then I will get to the questions at the end of the workshop. But before, I want to make sure that builders out there know about Builders DAO. There is a DAO that I am really appreciative of that is responsible for building really, really, really good subgraphs and substreams. And so if there's anyone out there that wants to get in contact with developers that are regularly working on really quality subgraphs and substreams, and then also getting paid through contracts, that is Builders DAO. And it is a DAO, so there's an application process. You do have to show your skills if you want to contribute to some of these contracts. If you just want to have a community that's really dedicated to building subgraphs, these guys are real good builders. So I do love the Graph Discord. There's tons of builders in there. That's good for hopping in, hopping out. But when you're ready to commit to a DAO that has some incredible builders, check out Builders DAO. You can go find them at buildersdao.tech. If you haven't checked out Builders DAO, go to buildersdao.tech, read about them. There are some quality subgraph and substream builders in there that just want to help with anyone that wants to get a subgraph or substream built, as well as have builders learn from them and learn from their experience. So just reach out. Good people. So let's go ahead and go into today's workshop. First things first, let's go through a quick high-level overview of what we're going to be going over. We're going to understand a subgraph's life cycle, and this assumes that you're already using Graph CLI. You've already deployed subgraphs. You already understand how to use Graph CLI. We're going to understand a Subgraph Studio, and that's kind of the meat of this presentation, and then how Subgraph Studio interacts with the graph network. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk a little bit about querying subgraphs. I'll kind of talk about it throughout a little bit with the end. So once again, this is Graph CLI, and Graph CLI is awesome. If you have had a chance to use it, you know how well built it is. There's a new feature in Graph CLI that is Graph Publish that I want to highlight. Shout out to the CLI builders on the team. Essentially, you could publish from the CLI, so you don't have to go ahead and on Studio. You could just do Graph Publish, and it'll take you through the process right there. Give that a try if you haven't already. What is Subgraph Studio? Subgraph Studio is a development environment for our subgraphs. It allows us to have an understanding of our versions, have some type of version control. Different endpoints are represented, either they be deployed endpoints or published endpoints. And understanding the difference between deployed and published through Studio is really what we're going to be doing a lot of today. So we're going to talk about these deployed and published subgraphs a lot. We're going to dive in a little bit here into this, but first let's go into a high-level overview of what deployed versus published subgraphs are. First things first, deployed subgraphs are really meant to be used in a development environment. That is a private environment. You, as the subgraph deployer, will be the only one that actually sees this subgraph. It's private for use for you and your development endpoint. It is also rate limited and free. So go ahead and deploy to your heart's content, use it as much as you want, add new features, take away features, extend, do whatever you want. And that is in the deployed status. A published subgraph is a public subgraph that is on the graph network. It's meant for use in production. The rate limits are gone. There's no more rate limits on the graph network when you have published your subgraph. And 100,000 queries are free per month if you would like to query that subgraph that's on the graph network. And when you are past that free plan, then there's the growth plan, which allows $38 per million queries. So that is essentially the high-level overview of deployed versus published. So let's go ahead and move on to diving in a little bit deeper to deployed subgraphs. Here, so we've got these deployed subgraphs, and we're looking right now at a subgraph that I'm currently building for IoTech. So we're going to be doing a workshop next week or the week after. This is a private environment. Like I said, it's got a version. You can see version 0.0.2. It has a few new features that I did from 0.0.1. It's currently indexing. And this is the place for me as a subgraph developer to iterate, to extend, test, figure out what I want my subgraph to do. How do I want to handle, do I want to do errors? Do I want to do different types of entities? Do I want to do different types of relations? All of this is my private environment to have fun, test out queries, go ahead and see what features I could add. Can I break the subgraph? Can I do whatever I want to do? Have fun, figure out, get it ready for showtime, for production, or just keep it here if you want it for a hackathon, whatever else you want to do. Totally free. The resources is another tip that I want to say for these deployed private subgraphs. This is a good time to just kind of immerse yourself in the resources of the graph as a whole. In here, we've got our docs. The docs are quite voluminous. Feel free to dive in and see what you could find and learn. Graph Devs, that is a new Twitter account that has just launched a few weeks ago. Go ahead and sign up to Graph Devs. Any core development team that has updates, we try to put one post on there per day that relates specifically to new things on the graph, specific to developers, or sometimes we'll be doing dives into subgraphs and substreams and seeing what techniques they're using. So look at that as kind of like a daily news feed for stuff that's happening with subgraphs and substreams. Also, of course, the Graph Discord, that's always available. Hop in and say hi. Developers, very senior and very junior, are in there all the time, so they're there to help. And also shout out to our support team. They are fantastic. If you have any bugs or errors or blockers, go ahead and hop in there. The support team will be there. Of course, what you can do also is go and search on YouTube. YouTube has, this is Graph Builder's newsletter. Graph Builder's newsletter is a newsletter I write every single month for builders out there that are developing with subgraphs and substreams that really just gives highlights for the month. So subscribe to that, check that out, really learn what's new in the space. Also, Builders DAO. Shout out to Builders DAO. Builders DAO is awesome. They are some of the best subgraph and substream developers in the ecosystem, and they build for contract. So if anyone's out there looking to just hire out their subgraph or substream development, go ahead and contact them. And if you want to learn from them, they're available for you to reach out to and say, hey, I'd like to learn. And they are open to having people apply to join their DAO and see if you could learn with them. And then finally, of course, join the Graph YouTube. There's videos there and tutorials there regularly. So just hop in, immerse yourself as much as you can. And I know that was a lot of information for tip number 2. Tip number 2, A, if you will, or 2B, is subgraph best practice number 1. If you are looking for a place to start, subgraph best practice number 2, subgraph best practice number 3, and subgraph best practice number 4. Really, really, really make sure that you are starting with these. If you're looking for a place to start, use these best practices. If you have, let's say, built a subgraph 2 or 3 years ago, and you said, hey, maybe I need to look. There's a lot of new features actually in just these 4 best practices that are live and really improve the indexing speed and query speed of your subgraph. So go ahead and hop in, learn these if you're looking for a place to start. And otherwise, let's keep on going to these tips for our private deployed subgraphs. Tip number 3, ensure the correct usage of endpoints. When you are in Subgraph Studio, get used to becoming aware of the endpoints that are in front of you. Make sure that if you are using the /latest endpoint, you know what that means. And what that means is, let's say I deployed a new version of a subgraph 2 minutes ago, and it's only been indexed 30%. Well, when I use the /latest endpoint in my front end, I'm going to be sending a query to a subgraph that's only indexed to 30%, as opposed to a previous version, which might be indexed all the way to 100%. So if you're okay with that, that's fine. But just know the difference. When you actually specify a specific endpoint with a specific version, you're going to know exactly what you're going to get. If you do /latest, you might get older data that's not all the way up the chain head. So just know that when you're developing. That's honestly a common theme throughout building with subgraphs because it is indexing. It does take time. Just make sure you know what endpoints you're using. Cool. Tip number 3 done. So let's now go ahead and talk about the published subgraphs. We did a little bit of information on deployed subgraphs. Here we are with published subgraphs. Once again, published subgraphs have no rate limiting. They're public and available for anyone to take a look at and query. Of course, people can't develop on them because they're yours and you own them through Subgraph Studio. but they can find the endpoint and they can go ahead and start querying it. So here's a few tips with published subgraphs. The first tip is you want to add good metadata right before you publish your subgraph. Right before you publish your subgraph, of course, you want to think, all right, well, the world is going to see my new API, and I want to make sure that people can find this API on the Graph Explorer because I'm proud of the subgraph that I've built. It's a valuable piece of infrastructure, and I want people to find it. So put a good description in. Put your source code in there. Make sure people can take a look at your code and see what's going on. Put your website URL. What is this subgraph populating? Put that information in there. Put the categories in there. Make sure people know your work exists. That's really, really important, just for the health of the network and just understanding that this is open data. Next thing, right before you publish your subgraph, you need to look at what version you're publishing. Make sure you're publishing the right version, and then also make sure it's all the way synced to Chainhead when it's that deployed subgraph and it's still private. You're about to publish it. Make sure it's all the way synced to Chainhead. If you look at this subgraph right here, you see it's synced to 87%. Let's say I am to publish that subgraph that's at 87% to the graph network and expose that version to the world. Well, that latest version that's to the world will also only be synced up to 87% of the data. So just when you're working on a new version and you've deployed a new version in the Subgraph Studio and it's your private subgraph, no one can see that new version, get that version all the way to Chainhead, then publish it. And when you publish that subgraph, it will automatically be synced all the way to Chainhead as soon as you have published it. So just make sure that's part of your regular practice when you go ahead and go for that deployment to publishing phase. So those are the things that you want to do right as you're publishing and thinking about these things. Tip number 3, you want to think, how much quality of service do I want when I publish my subgraph to the graph network? When I add GRT onto this publication process, I am incentivizing indexers around the world to hop in and provide redundancy and better quality of service to my subgraph. If I want 3, 5, 10 indexers around the world to look at my subgraph and index that data, I need to add more GRT. Right now, I found a subgraph and it has 11 indexers on it. As I recall, it had around 5,000 GRT on it, maybe a little more, 6,000 GRT. So, and as you need to know, GRT is, of course, existing in an open market. And so when that open market, there's fluctuations. But go ahead and look at the different subgraphs on the graph network, see how much GRT is being used on some subgraphs and see how many indexers they have. And you can generally get an idea of how much curation you want to use to get that redundancy. Now, once again, if you're just a hacker and you don't want to have the rate limiting, you don't want to have rate limiting taken away, you don't want to have that redundancy, you just want to hack, you don't need to publish. You could just simply stay in the deployed state and just stay there for free. But once you publish, it does involve incentivizing indexers on the graph network. So that's tip number 3. Finally, tip number 4, know subgraph ID versus deployment ID. So when we're in Subgraph Studio with the deployed subgraph, that's going to be private. There's, of course, different versions and different version endpoints. When we have published our subgraph to the graph network, subgraph ID and deployment ID become important. Subgraph ID is the ID of the subgraph itself, and deployment ID is specific to the versions. So both have different endpoints. Both use different endpoint styles. So you need to be sure when you have a deployed subgraph, understand the versioning. When you have a published subgraph, understand subgraph ID versus deployment ID and the versioning. And when you plug into either of those subgraphs, just make sure your front end, you understand the difference when you connect to your front end, whether it's a testing through your deployment or you're in production, which ones you want to use. And then also, this is a little cookbook I wrote up, subgraph ID versus deployment ID. I wrote this a few months ago. So just hop in. It's a short read, just 2 minutes, just to go over the differences. So those were the tips between deployment and deployed subgraphs and published subgraphs and how you interact with them in the studio. Stepping back, querying is, of course, what we want to do with our subgraphs and substreams. So when we're using GraphQL, just like any query language, there's optimized ways to use it. So go ahead and understand best practices to use GraphQL with our subgraphs and substreams. So go ahead and read this cookbook entry, Querying Best Practices, and go to our docs that's there, hop in. Good stuff right there. Other considerations, if deploying a subgraph to multiple chains, get used to using handlebars.js. It's really nice. Essentially, you get those double brackets to go ahead and template out and script out multiple chain deployment. That's really nice. And then also, anytime you're querying a subgraph on the Graph network, you are going to be using an API key. Make sure that you have used the security that is baked into Subgraph Studio for your API keys. You can authorize specific subgraphs, specific APIs to be used with the specific subgraphs, and then you could also authorize domains to be used with a specific subgraph as well. So that's just two nice security features to be implemented. If you're interested in joining the Graph ecosystem, feel free. How many, subscribees in the newsletter? Currently, I think we're going to keep that internally. That's just a metric that we use, but that's, we've got a good amount. We'll say I'm really proud of the numbers we're getting. How many devs within the DAO as of now? I think right now, like builders right now, I don't know off the top of my head that one either. But I mean, feel free to hop in. You'll see the devs in there all the time. They have their own Discord. Enjoy that. I personally am good friends with 4 of them, but I haven't been in there for a little bit. So 2 questions there. Let's see where the questions are. Questions on live stream. Can you edit your own query fees? So no. So those query fees are, that's a question I'm seeing in YouTube. Query fees are just part of the network, and they go up or down depending on the market. So good question right there. And for published subgraphs, what if someone copies the code of another subgraph and deploys it and does not see the need to pay for the query fees of the original published subgraph? That's a great question. Any subgraph as it is published can go ahead and, any subgraph that is on their GitHub is public. That can be forked and can actually go ahead and there can be 2 versions and 2 different things on 2 different versions of that exact same subgraph published. That is absolutely possible. Typically, what we see is not competing subgraphs on the Graph network. This has been an open market for years already. Typically, we see one subgraph and that one rise to the top. So in terms of could that happen? Sure. I have not seen 2 subgraphs significantly competing for any sort of volume. Typically one pulls ahead simply because of better market knowledge. People are more aware of that subgraph. It has possibly more curation on it. The market works its magical, invisible hand. So, and that is 2 questions from Justice on YouTube. Thank you so much, Justice, for that. I'm going to go ahead and check elsewhere. Yeah, I'm seeing in chat there's many tabs open. Yeah, I had you guys managing chat. This is, I think I hit a threshold of managing chat windows, being at a conference right now, being in a hotel with new internet. I think I hit threshold. Let's see if there's any information in any questions on the chat in Graph Devs and the Twitter there. So funny. I appreciate everyone taking the time today, the double time today, for watching this presentation twice if you did. And shout out to Dave for editing this down. Shout out to Yana also for streaming, and all of the people that I know in the Graph ecosystem. Love ya, love ya, love ya. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. And feel free to share this workshop once it's on the Graph YouTube to any developers getting started and wanting to better understand developing in Subgraph Studio and kind of how that workflow goes. So with that all being said, have a good rest of your day, everybody. Enjoy this Thursday, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.